The mainstream media seems to have made this unanimous decision that it does not report on the private lives of politicians unless it somehow affects their work. Now, maybe that's a notion that has to be reconsidered. I'm not talking about the media going out and pointing to, say, a gay cabinet minister or an MP who's having an affair, but in the case of Vic Toews, here was a guy who was justice minister. At one point, he was looking for a judgeship. He comes from a party that espouses family values. And, you know, at the same time, he impregnated a parliamentary assistant half his age. Perhaps that is an issue that should have been reported because it raises questions of character that the voters, his constituents, might have wanted to know about.
Well, it's not the same story, but John Edwards, it is a similar kind of situation, destroyed his presidential ambitions because, in the United States anyway, Gloria, it was reported on.
Yeah, I think the public is probably surprised to find out that the Ottawa Press Gallery, at least, has known about these, Mr. Toews' private travails for years and did not report on them, with perhaps one small exception, that we largely ignored the story. But it's, I guess, a lesson for the public and for us that we do actually do things a little bit differently up here than they do in Washington. And there's a trade-off for it. In Washington and Britain, they don't have what they call scrums, right? They don't have the kind of access to their politicians that we do up here. Now, so you might argue our access has been curtailed somewhat for the past 5 years.
Argue correctly.
but we still get more access to our ministers very close up than they do in a lot of countries. So there is a little bit of give and take here.
Look, it's always difficult to draw a line on this. I'll give you an example. Hypocrisy. We all agree that hypocrisy, if it's relevant to public policy, makes these stories germane. For example, there were allegations before the 2000 election that George W. Bush had previously used cocaine. Is that relevant? Yes, it is, because as governor of Texas, he sent a lot of people to prison for that. So that will be a legitimate line of inquiry. What I worry about when I look at this is I see a lot of rationalization. People reaching for some reason why they can go into this legitimately, when in fact what's really going on is you don't like Vic Toews, you don't like the Conservatives, you don't like their bill, and you want to smear the man. And that is dangerous because these stories can consume the media, they can consume public discourse, and so they can distract us so that rather than talking about public policy and democratic politics the way we should be, we end up talking about sleaze.
Or can I just have a word on that? I mean, I think I like the idea of a job-related criteria. In other words, does the story we know and haven't reported yet affect this politician's, this leader's ability to do this job for the Canadian people? If we keep that in mind, and I know what Roger raises is a good point. Character is sometimes an important issue. That maybe should be the judgment we make.
This Conservative government was among the first to use social media to further its political agenda, and it has hired dozens of people in the Privy Council office to monitor it. But this week, it felt the full force of internet fury when it tried to introduce a bill that would give authorities extraordinary power to retrieve private information from a computer file without a warrant. The bill's real name is Investigating and Preventing Criminal Electronic Communications Act. But this message discipline government abruptly changed it on Tuesday to what you see on the podium to try to frame the issue its way.
Either stand with us or with the child pornographers.
And that's when the backlash began. Within 24 hours, something we rarely see in Ottawa, Conservative MPs criticizing a Conservative bill.
I think it's too intrusive as it currently stands and does need to be looked at.
The caucus pressure so intense the Prime Minister pushed the bill to committee early and showed a willingness to change it.
We will ensure that Parliament fully studies this bill.
Here's what Bill C-30 would allow. It will compel internet service providers to allow access to private data without a warrant. Currently, that's voluntary. Compel those same companies to install expensive surveillance hardware. And it also gives the minister the power to appoint anyone to search the data, not only cops. And it gives that appointed inspector the right to duplicate any documents he or she finds. All of it without any oversight or appeal.
Every single Canadian citizen is walking around with an electronic prisoner's bracelet
Then, at some point on Wednesday, a still anonymous person fought back using a computer traced to Parliament Hill to establish a fake Twitter account aimed at Public Safety Minister Vic Toews. It spilled public information about his divorce, his family, and his spending as an MP. On Thursday, the rest of the Twitterverse piled on, sharing with Toews everything they're doing, from the mundane to the ridiculous. So many people jumped on the hashtag #TellVicEverything that it was briefly the second most talked about Twitter subject in the world.
Order, please.
By Friday, the Speaker approved an investigation into the source of the fake Twitter account. And the government, stung by the force of the backlash, accused political rivals of being behind it, without providing evidence.
Today, Mr. Speaker, we are very concerned that taxpayers' dollars have been misused